It's been about 2 weeks since we have cooked together. I had family in town visiting, and then I wasn't feeling well. So, not only have I not been filming cooking videos for YouTube, I also haven't been cooking hardly at all. But I am back into the swing of things, and I'm switching up our ingredients and menu to freshen up for spring. For lunch, I am making a creamy lemon chicken and spinach. And I think I just mentioned recently on YouTube that I very rarely cook lunch, but I am cooking lunch this day because we don't have anything else to eat. So for this, first what I need to do is poach some garlic. And this is a very simple recipe for poaching garlic, but I got it from Vivian Howard's cookbook. This will make it taste good. It's actually the first step for her herb sauce, which is delicious, by the way. But I'm just poaching the garlic because I want that garlic for not just this recipe, but also to use in dressings and recipes for the rest of the week. So to poach that garlic, I simply just peeled about 20 cloves of garlic and I am simmering it on the stove for about 20 minutes in a little bit of olive oil. You don't want it to sizzle. You're not frying the garlic, but you are just letting it simmer until it turns golden brown. I am just checking these chicken thighs for any bones or cartilage. Just a side note, 3 times in a row from 3 separate batches of chicken thighs recently, I bit into bone or cartilage. And one time I thought it cracked my tooth. Luckily, it did not, but I am just taking care to make sure that there is nothing in those chicken thighs. And then I'm dredging them through a little bit of all-purpose flour, and then I'm pan frying them in a little olive oil in my cast iron skillet. Now, I often have issues with my house getting really smoky when I pan fry food. So what I like to do is I like to sear both sides of the meat and then I like to transfer it into the oven. That way it prevents all that smokiness, but I can also just move on with the recipe. You can actually get this recipe over on my blog at moonandmagnolia.com. I'll link it in the description box, but you can also just go over there and search for a creamy lemon chicken. And in that recipe on my blog, I made this as a 1 skillet meal, which is really helpful and convenient sometimes, but I actually think I like doing it better this way, where I pan fry the chicken, put it in the oven, and then I can just make the sauce in the pan, but I can keep that chicken separate because really once you put it in the sauce, which you'll see in a little bit, it doesn't really keep that well. And I made a little bit of extra chicken for us to use later in the week. I am deglazing the cast iron pan with a little bit of white wine, and now I'm taking some of that poached garlic and putting it right into the skillet. And because it's cooked, it's really mild and tastes so good, and I like to keep it kind of in bigger chunks because it tastes so good from being poached. And then I'm adding in about a cup of cream or so and the rest of the white wine. Anytime I use white wine, I just buy a little box of splits. It's not the most cost-effective way to do it, but I don't drink a lot of white wine and I don't cook a lot with white wine, so I just won't get through it in time. So that's a better way for me. And then I'm mixing that together, squeezing in 1 lemon, putting in some Parmesan, and that is a delicious cream sauce. This cream sauce can be made any way you want. In fall, I tend to put more sage-like flavors in it, but in spring, it's lemon all the way. Now, I keep this on low just so I don't burn the cream, and then I actually just turn it off when I put in the spinach. And I just stir it until that spinach starts to wilt. Don't overcook that spinach or it's going to get really slimy. In fact, I think sometimes when people say they don't like cooked spinach, it's probably because it has been overcooked. You want that spinach to just wilt and still stay bright green. If it starts to turn dark green, it is overcooked and it just doesn't taste as good. We ate this for lunch over a bed of orzo and it was delicious. Okay, next up on the menu is fresh milled sourdough chocolate chip muffins. And full disclosure, I actually was going to use my chocolate chip muffin recipe, but use blueberries instead. But when I opened the freezer, the blueberries had spilled out of the bag and they were all over the bottom of the freezer. So we are back to the original of chocolate chip muffins. But I think that underscores an important point about cooking and baking for spring is that the flavors are more mild and the flavors are lighter. And I think they tend to be a little bit more versatile. This muffin recipe is a really great base muffin recipe that you can put just about anything in to match the season. So for me, when I'm making things for spring, whether it's cooking dinner or just baking a treat, I'm really focused on mild flavors because that's what tastes good to me this time of year. But in any case, this recipe is made with fresh milled soft white wheat and, of course, baking powder, baking soda, and salt. And then in a separate bowl, I'm mixing together sugar, avocado oil, vanilla, sourdough starter. You could use active or inactive, sour cream, whole milk, and 2 eggs. If you don't have a grain mill, you could definitely use all purpose flour for this, but you'll probably need to reduce it by about a half a cup. But what I like about using fresh milled flour is that it is more filling. Fresh milled flour has all three parts of the wheat berry in it, the endosperm, germ, and bran. So that means it is 100% whole grain flour. And one of these muffins for me really is a meal because it is that filling. So often when I'm baking, it ends up just being like a treat and it's a little bit extra in our day. But this actually ends up just being part of my regular meal menu for the week. And that works out really nicely for a number of reasons. One, it's just less stuff that I have to cook. Two, I get to eat a muffin for a meal and it's delicious. But also, when you are eating whole grains like that, because they are more filling, it actually ends up being a lot cheaper. Often, when we think of grocery budgets, we're thinking of just the dollars that we spend, but we're not thinking about what those dollars do for us once we eat the food. So, if you spend $1 on a muffin and you're hungry 10 minutes later, that's $1 wasted. But if you spend $1 on a muffin and you're full for 3 or 4 hours, that is money well spent. And for us, spring is the kickoff of when we need really easy grab and go food. And if I don't have things prepared that are filling and nutritious, we just end up running through the drive through. I just run somewhere and grab something, and it's very expensive and it's not very nutritious. I like to use these little tulip liners just because they're pretty, and I'm filling them with 4 tablespoons of batter. So the spoon that I'm using holds 2 tablespoons, so I'm just filling that up twice. And then I'm baking them at 425 for 5 minutes. And I know that sounds really hot, and it is, but that initial bake at 425 will help them rise, which can be a little bit tricky sometimes with fresh milled flour. So at 425 for 5 minutes, and then I drop the temperature to 350 and I bake them, I'd say about 20 to 25 minutes. Really, it kind of depends on how big the muffins are. Just put a toothpick in the middle of one, and if it comes out clean, they're done. And if there's a few moist crumbs on there, that's okay too. You just want to make sure there's not a lot of wet batter on them. We live near a local farm that has you pick strawberries. And we recently went and picked a bunch of strawberries together as a family. And I actually filmed a lot there. And I'm feeling really irritated with myself right now because as I'm doing this voiceover, I just remembered that I never dropped in our really sweet footage of our daughter picking strawberries. But I'll get that in maybe in next week's video. But in any case, we picked a bunch of strawberries and we've been doing strawberry everything around here. Over on my blog at moonandmagnolia.com, there are a number of strawberry recipes coming. Right now, there is a home canned strawberry jam recipe, but next week I will be publishing my pickled strawberry recipe. And I'm using those pickled strawberries to make a really easy spring breakfast. So first, I'm just picking some basil out in our garden. Our garden's actually doing really well this year. After last year, it was such a mess, but I'm really happy to say that our garden is doing great. And I'm toasting up some sourdough sandwich bread that's also made with fresh milled flour. I like to let the toast cool just a little bit so when I slather it with cream cheese, the cream cheese doesn't melt into the toast. And then I am piling on the pickled strawberries. These are simply just fresh strawberries thrown into a jar with some white wine vinegar, sugar, black peppercorns, and then topped off with water, and then stick them in the fridge for about 24 hours, and they are delicious. I'm pinching off a little bit of fresh basil, putting a little more cracked pepper on there, and this is so good. This is what spring mornings are made for. I used to teach in person sourdough workshops, and I just taught people how to make and care for a sourdough starter so they could begin their own sourdough journeys at home. And the workshops always did really well in the fall and winter, but as soon as the weather started warming up, people stopped signing up because people think that spring isn't for baking. But I think that spring is a great time for baking. It's really just a shift in how we bake and what we bake. So in the fall and winter, I tend to lean heavily on rustic no knead sourdough breads. It's crusty, it's warm, it's heavy. But in spring, this is when I make a lot of things like brioche rolls and also sourdough sandwich bread, like I am making here. So if you really love to bake, but you feel like spring isn't the time to do it, I really encourage you to try new recipes that lighten up the texture of the bread that you're making because it pairs better with the other flavors and foods of the season. Where we live in southeastern North Carolina, it's already very hot here during the day. And so the thing that I like also about sourdough sandwich bread is that it doesn't require a 500-degree oven. The oven only has to get to 375. So if you're already combating a bunch of heat, it is nice to make breads like this because it doesn't make your kitchen that much hotter. I have a few different sandwich bread recipes over my blog at moonandmagnolia.com. I'll leave links for those below. I have one regular sourdough sandwich bread recipe, a maple oatmeal one, and then also coming soon is my fresh milled flour sourdough sandwich bread. That should be up by the time you're watching this, but if not, I'll have the date in there when it will be available. Now, the daytime temperatures here have been really warm. Some days we've already reached 90 degrees, but the evenings can still be really cool. And here and there, we have had some evenings that have dropped into the 50s. So I am making a fire roasted tomato and vegetable soup for this cool spring evening. And I know a lot of you live in places that maybe isn't quite so warm as it is here. So this is a really nice recipe to transition from winter into spring. I know when we're thinking of spring foods, we're thinking of things that are light and airy, but there's still a bit of a chill in the air sometimes, especially if you live somewhere that might have a colder climate than we do here in North Carolina. But I still like to make soup, and honestly, I like to make soup all year long. I love soup, but in the fall and winter, I make really heavy, thick, creamy potato soups. But starting in spring, I like to make brothier soups that are really heavy in vegetables. I am still trying to get through our sweet potato harvest from last fall, so I am chopping up some of those sweet potatoes and cooking them with some onions, and then I'm throwing in some fresh garlic. I would have used the poached garlic, but I actually don't always put my videos together in the same order that I film them, so I didn't have the poached garlic yet when I made this soup, but it would have been really good in there. But if you are using fresh garlic, just make sure you put it in right before you're ready to put the broth in. It really only needs like 30 seconds to a minute to cook or it might turn bitter. This is home canned turkey broth. So I actually took my Thanksgiving turkey, put it in the freezer for, I don't know, months. And then just a few weeks ago, I made broth and then I canned it. So I am putting the turkey broth in there, but you could use chicken broth, whatever you have on hand. Beef broth will work too. But about 8 cups of broth is what you want. I don't keep a lot of store-bought canned goods on hand unless I'm really in a pinch, or there are just a few things that I really like to keep on hand, which one of them is these fire roasted diced tomatoes. They are really good. They add a lot of flavor to your food, so I'm just throwing a whole can right in there. And then from here, the world is your oyster. You can put anything you want in there. I am picking a little bit of oregano from my garden. I'm growing oregano in a pot. Last year, I put it in my actual garden and then it took over my garden. So I'm just keeping it in a pot this year. You can put any herbs in there. And I really encourage you, if you do have fresh herbs, to put them in there because they add so much flavor. And it's really the first harvest of spring. So it's really fun to put fresh herbs in there and finally get those flavors in your food after a long winter. Now, I'm also putting in some freeze-dried cherry tomatoes from our garden last year. Anytime you put freeze-dried food in a pot like this, don't hold it over the pot. The steam will automatically start to rehydrate that food. So just pour it in your hand and then dump it into the pot. When cooking with freeze-dried food like this, you do have to alter the process a little bit and just check to make sure you have enough liquid. So first, freeze-dried food takes a little bit longer to reconstitute than what you think it would, especially when there's things like skin on it, like a tomato skin. So I'm putting them in about halfway through the cooking process, but I'm also checking to make sure that once they are fully reconstituted, that I still have enough broth because they're reconstituting with the broth, which makes them very delicious, by the way. but it also means that you might not have enough broth for your actual soup. So just keep an eye on that. And then I'm just throwing in some green beans and a little bit of red wine vinegar, and this is a delicious soup. Really, you can add anything you want here. Just make sure you time the vegetables appropriately. Cook the hard vegetables first, things like onions and carrots and sweet potatoes, because they take longer to cook. And then once you can pierce those hard vegetables with a fork, then you can throw in your softer vegetables, say like zucchini or green beans or cherry tomatoes, for example. You just want to make sure that you don't put them all together, because those soft vegetables will overcook in the amount of time that it takes the hard vegetables to cook. But in any case, you can put anything you want in there, but the three things that I never leave out in this recipe are the cherry tomatoes, the fire roasted tomatoes, and that red wine vinegar. They are so good and really sets this soup apart. These are the recipes we are enjoying for spring, and I hope you are also enjoying all that spring has to offer in its beautiful flavors too. See you again next time.